Well, I think all the things that we've talked about, I think it's acceptance. I think, not judging other people, obviously not doing any crime. I think it's really, by and large, it is accepting and caring for your family, friends, neighbors, strangers. I think there needs to be more of that. I think that and I'm not the authority, Santa Claus is, so this is me speaking for Richie Buck, basically. Yes. Yeah, love people years worth in a day to make up for everything. And there's also, give yourself grace, because I think that we're and I deal with this a lot because I'm constantly thinking like, I'm not doing enough and I could do more, and I have to give myself grace. And I think it's important for other people to give the people that they interact with grace, because life is hard. There's nothing about it anymore that's really easy. It's hard. It's convoluted. We just went through a pandemic. The economy is, inflation's up. There's, no matter which side you're listening to, they're going to tell you that it's worse than it is. Give yourself some grace, love yourself, accept yourself, and provide a little bit of that grace and love to other people, because people need it right now. And there are a lot of people out there hurting, and there are a lot of people that could benefit from your podcast. I think and hope they could benefit from my podcast and from a lot of these other podcasts that are generally coming from places of pure intention.
This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. That's Jason Usry, the creator, the producer, writer, and head elf of the true crime satire podcast, Santa May Be a Criminal. Jason has been an audio producer for more than half a dozen popular podcasts, including several popular true crime podcasts and those in other genres. Like the Santa Who May Be a Criminal, Jason grew up in a small town in Georgia where he learned the power of writing to help heal and entertain people. This is the second of 2 episodes with Jason, who's also a screenwriter and a producer himself. In the first episode, we talked about growing up in a small town, his journey to bringing Santa Claus and satire into the true crime space, and the power that writing can have to help lives. If you've not caught that episode, I recommend you go back and listen. Today, we're going to continue our conversation on the thought process that goes into writing fiction, the inspiration for some of the characters on his podcast, what working in podcasting in Hollywood are like, and what we can all do to build more joyful lives for those around us. And yes, how to get on and stay on the nice stuff. What's that process like? Like, most people aren't writers and can't sort of just create things that are certainly things that are authentic as the things that you create. What is your process like? Like, I kind of, listening to you, you just sound like a connoisseur of life, that all the time you're sucking in new and interesting things to create. Go ahead, just tell me, what's the process like?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like to listen. I like to talk to people. I like to talk about philosophical things, and not like boring philosophical things, but things that impact people on a very, one-to-one basis. It's a lot of listening. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of watching. I've watched consumed a lot of content in my life, but dialogue is hard because it can be taken out of, dialogue is probably the most nitpicked thing in screenwriting, because a lot of it depends on, I've seen really bad lines of dialogue look really good or sound really good when delivered by the right actor,
Actor. Right. Right.
so it becomes this thing, where you have to be kind of careful. And for me, it's always
And your actors as you do it? Like, are you thinking about who is going to deliver this?
no, like, well, not in that scenario. Again, like with them, I wanted to have, I had, it was one of these things, like, so in season one, for instance, I never mentioned that, like, Richie is attached to anybody, but I mentioned that Richie has a son because one day I was recording and my little boy came in and interrupted my recording. And so I said, "Hey, like, what do you want to say to the microphone?" And he said, "I'm Batman." Which was amazing to me. I thought that was, so I kept it in the show just as,
Perfect.
because it's, but again, for as a gift to me, and for them, it was the same sort of thing. Like, I knew I wanted Santa Claus. I had not mentioned that Santa Claus and Karen Claus had a son or a daughter or anything like that. And a lot of the show, I operate on a sort of, my formula, so to speak, is, you've got sort of your sort of A plot, maybe a B plot, and then at the end of the episode, there's some sort of twist that pushes you into wanting to listen to the next episode. And I think the episode before that, the twist was that Richie, determined, like, finds out that Santa Claus has a daughter or whatever, and so then he goes to meet her in the episode. And but I wanted to have, again, since they were married, and I've tried to, like, keep people together as much as I could because I want them to have fun with it. I feel like it's, again, it's sort of a gift to them. It's like Brittany and John are now, they're in the show, as a couple too, and it's like Shiloh and Sydney, I don't have a scene where they've met each other yet, but I want to have that happen where Detective Strong talks to Ellie the Elf. So there are things like that that are kind of played throughout the show as well. But in terms of just sort of, I think you're right. Like, I enjoy I enjoy people. I enjoy being around people most of the time. I enjoy listening to people. I enjoy hearing the things that make people joyful and happy. And so I've just tried to sort of keep that as sort of my center in terms of the way I listen. I just try to listen to people because I think, like, going back to what you said earlier, truth is stranger than fiction in a lot of scenarios, and also it's real, and I wanted, and I'm glad that a lot of this has come off as authentic, because that is the idea.
It actually sounds like it really is authentic for you. It's different characters, like fictional characters, but there is something very true to, like, the lessons that we can learn from the stories and from Richie and from. It sounds like it is very much real, you know.
It certainly is for me. Like, it is my DNA. Like, this is, I told, I've told a couple of friends of mine, like, I almost launched a podcast called the Absolutely Positively Podcast, and all I wanted to do in that podcast was
You may have
highlight.
actually launched that podcast. It's just called Santa Mania Criminal.
That's funny. But yeah, the point of that podcast initially was to just highlight good things, because it wasn't, again, this was a pandemic idea. And I do have another podcast I want to do that's more of a documentary style podcast, but which was my initial idea that I wanted to do, that I hope that I can do sometime
Oh, break some
soon.
news and tell me more.
I'll tell you about it in just a second. I won't tell you necessarily the name of it, but I'll tell you what the sort of the broad idea is. But the Absolutely Positively podcast was me, because I got on this kick of watching all, like, old Mr. Rogers videos. And he does, yeah, he does that, that song, It's You I Like.
Hmm.
And that to me is such a powerful, powerful song. And it was so ahead of, and so much of what he did was so ahead of where the world was at the time, and in some cases where the world is now.
Oh, and yeah, that reminds me of like what you were saying about growing up in Georgia and how Titanic brought all those people together, like Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street. For some people,
Right.
like those are ties that bind us.
Absolutely. It's the acceptance thing for me. It's the, you know, I don't care who you are, where you come from, what you look like, who you worship,
Yeah,
who you
criminal
love.
or not.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, like, you're valuable,
Yes.
you
Correct.
know, and so I wanted to be the 21st century Mr. Rogers, but that's just too high a bar, right? So, but I wanted to do like a quick little show every week and just pick the best, the happiest, most positive news stories and highlight them. And then actually that has sort of spun into something that I might do as an offshoot of this show, is the naughty and nice news, which would be both naughty news and nice news, and just finish on nice news.
Oh, what a great idea. Is it going to be coming at us from the North Pole or?
I have thought about that. I thought about doing it. I've thought about having elves doing it.
Yeah, you could have Krampus doing it from Norway.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Krampus, Billy Krampus. That's Morgan from Crimepedia. So, oh, and Myra Abernathy, by the way, I don't think I mentioned this earlier. She's Cherry from Crimepedia. They have a great podcast as well.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, the idea for me has always been to try to highlight the good stuff. The
Hmm.
the Santa, universe gives an opportunity to do that in a really unique way. And the other thing, I do want to say this because it's important to me. Every show, every main show that we do highlight a nonprofit in the true crime space to try to shed light on their work. Like, we've done the Porchlight Project, we've done Cold Case Investigative Research Institute, we've done private investigations for the missing. We've done a lot of different. Not as many nonprofit. Initially, my idea was to do a different nonprofit every episode, but that hasn't worked out that way. But that's the other thing too that's very important to me, is that, like, I know while we're having some fun in sort of the genre, that we are remembering that there are people that are suffering and that we're trying to get answers for,
Yep.
and make sure that we're shining light on that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you guys, a lot of the best podcasters in the space do that. They don't just tell the stories like the Idaho murders where
Mm-hmm.
they tell the stories of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and
Right.
people that you wouldn't necessarily have heard of.
Right.
And I think it adds a real value to the world. Even the people, I think of all the people who have spent time on places like Web Sleuths. I mean, I think it's more than 20 now, or 30 missing people who have been identified, bodies that were found through their work. And that's the other thing about the true crime community. It gets nailed and it gets beaten up for some legit things sometimes, but it does do some powerful good. So I'm going to ask you about Hollywood in a second, but first I want to ask you something else.
Okay.
So during your day job, you do marketing, right, for a television station.
Yep.
During your night job, you write your own fictionalized podcast, coordinate with all these people who do the voice acting for it. And then you also are an audio producer for other podcasts. So I don't know, is it distractibility or what drives you? But I was just curious, why the audio podcasting? And I bring this up because, I've mentioned her name, Alyssa Grunfelder, who's my podcast producer, she's great, she's organized, she's creative, she's talented, but I think few people who are not like in the podcast industry understand how difficult us hosts can be. We never say everything right the first time. We always change our minds. We do X, Y, or Z. It's just it's just a field. I'm so curious about why people get into it. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'd never want to lose Alyssa.
Right.
It's why that part, Jason?
It goes back to my love of storytelling. Like I love to hear different stories. Like for instance, so I got into the space. I mentioned her earlier, Rebecca Sebastian with
Mhm.
criminality. She's the first person that I worked with, or she's the first podcast I listened to that I actually reached out to the creator and said, "Hey, I like your show." And we started a dialogue through that. And over the course of months, we became friends. And then she had a situation where her current editor at the time couldn't do the work anymore. So she reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested. And I said, sure. And so I started to edit. That was Dialogue, was her podcast then, which she sunsetted, and now she's focused on criminality and some other projects. So I met Rebecca, and then Rebecca introduced me to Shiloh and Scott. Now, in that time, I was producing a show called End of Watch with Bootsy and Sal, which I mentioned Kevin Grogan earlier, who plays Sheriff Dewberry in the show, and he's a former homicide detective and patrol officer, and did a lot of specialized operations. And his partner in that podcast is a guy named Lou Velosi, who is about to really blow up. He just released his book late last year, I think it was, Storefront Sting. He was an ATF undercover agent who was buying guns and narcotics off the street. And the two of them were very focused on mental health and policing, which I thought was really interesting because this is something that's not talked about very often.
Yeah.
And that world is very, very focused on alpha personalities and
Oh, there's so much stigma.
testosterone.
There's so
Yeah,
much stigma. You know,
yeah.
yeah, and about the mental health work I do.
Mhm.
There are, and I've seen this at the CIA. I've seen it at the FBI. I've seen it in law enforcement, where you know officers or um, in the case of FBI agents, won't even use their health insurance to get mental health because they're
Right.
so afraid that if they do reach out to get help, that they're behind the times probably a little bit on this, but that they're going to end up in trouble or end up sidelined.
I was going to say sidelines. Yeah, that we heard that over and over again in the podcast. That they're scared. They're going to take away their badge and their gun, and how much of their identity is built into that persona.
And it's
Um,
sad to think that the people who we expect, because we haven't invested enough in frontline mental health, but we expect the police to deal with the mental health challenges of so many people on a daily basis,
right.
but we don't create an environment where they can take care of their mental health.
Well, and especially when, again, these two guys. I mean, if a zombie apocalypse happened tomorrow, these are the two guys I want in my front yard fighting off the zombies. This is how tough these guys are. And to hear them talk with so much vulnerability and candor and honesty about the need to save the mental health of our frontline responders, it was something really special to me. And he and Kevin and Lou had tried to do their podcast, and again, I was sort of like itching to do this other podcast that I want to do. And I said I told him I'd help him because I wanted to learn how it worked. Basically, I wanted to kind of figure out the process, and so I was doing that, and I was working with Rebecca. Then later, I started working with Rebecca, and then she introduced me to Shiloh and Scott at LA Not So Confidential, who were some of the instigators of Santa May Be a Criminal with me. And then they introduced me to Crawl Space Media, so I worked with Tim and Lance on some projects, and then with Brett and Alice, I I literally wrote them early on in their show. I wrote them an email and said, "Hey, I've got this idea to do this true crime satire podcast," and they have
Jason,
phrases.
you'll laugh. I used to say I'll never serve on a criminal jury because as a former reporter, I'd get up there and tell you I've never met a prosecutor that I've trusted. Brett and Alice have changed that.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, they're super trustworthy, and I love them to death. And again, I kind of wrote them on just sort of a whim and said, "Hey, I listen to your show, I love your show. Like, I want to satirize you guys in this show. Would you be willing?" And like the same day, absolutely, let's do it. And then I hadn't even met them at that point, and then of course I met them later, and they've been such huge supporters of the show. And and then I've done a couple of other shows that I've worked on. I've worked on a show called Death by Incarceration that I edited and things like that. That was through Crawl Space as well. But I think the drive for that is I just enjoy like storytelling through the audio medium. It's really fun to me because people,
Documentaries without the limitations of needing film or time on air or
yeah, and you can really, and people say a lot that can be cut out too, which is interesting. So for me, it's a constant sort of like stretch of how can I streamline this so it's the most direct, shot of the story to the viewer, or to the listener. But for the work that I do with Brett and Alice and Shiloh and Scott, I love them as people, and they're all super supportive of my work, and it's just fun to listen to their content. And they both have completely different podcasts. Like Shiloh and Scott, they break down their mental health podcasts or forensic psychologists in their day job, so they break down mental health issues and cases, and they do vintage true crime, and they do a documentary. They do like two forensic psych shows a month, and they do a vintage true crime case and on one week, and then they do a true crime documentary review in 1 week. So every other week is the true crime or the forensic psych thing, and then they fit the other two in between them. But I mean, they're some of my best friends in the world. And then Brett and Alice, obviously they do a ton of interesting stuff, and they have a unique style that I really jive with. And so I love working with the people. And
thread there though, and it's not, to me it's not true crime. It's actually like humanity. Like,
yes,
between the podcasts that you listed and Santa, maybe, like, the common thread to me seems to be they're all about understanding yourself, understanding other people, and understanding the world around you. And, like, it might be easy to say that a lot of podcasts are like that, but I don't think that's actually true in an authentic and deep way all the time. I just, listening to you, Jason, it just sounds like there's this deep desire to understand people, understand yourself, understand the world around you, and see the good in things.
I think you're exactly right on that. I think that's exactly what I'm trying to do always. And I'm certainly not always, I get as cynical and frustrated and angry as everybody else.
You worked in Hollywood. What else would I expect?
Yeah, right, yeah. And local news, which, the
Yes.
news interests, or, that.
If it
But
bleeds, it leads.
yeah, right, yeah. And it does, you get a certain gallows humor,
Yep.
that you just to cope with
Yep.
just sort of all the ugliness that you see all the time. But yeah, at my core, I think it is. I think it is me trying to understand humanity and be a better human and offer more. I serve on a number of different nonprofit boards, and I'm constantly, and to a fault sometimes, give of myself, because I don't always, and I know you know this about me because you've called me on it, that I don't always refill my cup the way I should. And I need to get better about that, because this is the kind of thing that I'm trying to advocate other people to do. But yeah, it comes from a place of curiosity and hopefulness that we are doing things to lift each other up, because I'm frankly so alarmed and bothered by just where we are as people, with not accepting each other, with, picking fights, with the just arbitrary BS that I see all the time, that are keeping us back from being and succeeding, as country, as a people, as a whatever.
Mhm.
It's very, very concerning to me, because and I'm not trying to speak from a specific political or
Yeah.
ideological stance. I think it's on both sides. I think that the blame is
Yeah.
universal, but
No one's listening.
I know,
Yeah.
I know it, and it's terrifying that we've forgotten how to listen to each other, and we've forgotten how to have an open dialogue. And it's okay to disagree with each other, so long as you do it respectfully and you're willing to listen to the other side, and maybe we'll learn that we're not so different on either side of the aisle, or the sleigh, or wherever we're sitting. You know what I mean?
Yep. Did we just both say slay at the same
Yeah.
time? Oh, you have a great sense of humor in it. Great.
But yeah, you asked about Hollywood, so I'll give you a real brief.
It's the only thing that doesn't fit.
Yes, yes. So yeah, my only real interaction with Hollywood is, I've written a handful of screenplays, or I've written like 40 screenplays in my life, but a handful have been produced. I've got two in post production right now. One's a crime thriller, one's a horror film. I wrote a movie called Dead Water. Before that, I wrote a movie called Run for My Roots, which was previous. I kind of rewrote it, and initially it was a sort of an actress who got too much fame in Hollywood, and she comes home to her hometown and meets the pastor that she was in love with when she was in high school, and they need to save his church and whatever. And anyhow, we reformatted that for country music, and so it was sort of a friendly film. And then Dead Water was literally sort of we have a financier, Chris Hilton, who actually plays the Todd father in Santa Maybe a Criminal.
Mm.
He came to me and says, "Oh, I've got a financier who is interested in a certain amount of money, and do we have?" It wasn't a ton of money. It was nothing to shake a stick at, but it wasn't a ton. And he said, "Do you have a script for that price point?" I said, "No." He said, "Can you write something?" I said, "Well, of course." And then he said, "Well, what do we need to do?" And I said, "Well, it has to be limited locations, limited cast." He said, "Well, let's put them on a boat." And I will tell you, this is the best advice. If there's any screenwriter out there right now listening to this podcast, and I'm sure there are dozens, maybe hundreds, never put them on a boat.
Yes.
So,
You really your options there.
right. So yeah. So I wrote this movie, Dead Water, and it was an interesting thing. Casper Van Dien is a very, very good human being. He's amazing. Judd Nelson is probably the smartest cinephile I've ever met in my life. He is a genius. He loves movies. Interesting character, but loves movies. Griff First, who was the main lead in that, just an amazing guy, such a champion of it. But you run into things in independent film where you know you don't have the support of a studio or a team of producers or things like that. So things end up getting cut, and you have to adapt, improvise, adapt, and overcome, basically. And so we had to do that, and then same sort of thing with a couple of these other projects. I don't know exactly what I wrote ends up on the screen or whatever,
Right.
but creating the collaborative process with these producers and directors has given me the opportunity to continue to go back and back and back, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun. Like I will say this, and I never thought I would say this. I think I prefer doing the podcast because maybe I'm a control freak. I typically not, but I prefer because I'm in control of all of that. Like the
Yeah.
soundscaping, the music selection,
Story,
the
because
story, the character,
a lot of
the
people don't realize that if you're a screenwriter, the percentage of what you write that might actually make it onto the screen is probably pretty low.
it is very low. It really is because, it goes through, you have to just think about the number of filters. Like you go through the director filter, the actor filter, the cinematography filter, the editing filter, what whoever the distributor is going to have a say in what ends up, in it. There are all these different things that just kind of take away from what you've got, and
Marketing
it could.
team, senior management, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then like, for instance, for Santa Maybe a Criminal, I write it, I produce it, I sound design it, I edit it, I market it, literally I do everything for that show. The only thing I don't do is I don't do all the voices, and thankfully I have a lot of great people that do voices for me. But everything else in that I do. And it's really, that is also very satisfying to me. It's like I now
Joy that comes.
just so much joy when I'm sitting editing. I might have 25 tracks of audio that are going at the same time because I'm building like whatever, a forest soundscape or a farm lands thing going on, and just listening through to it, like, and closing my eyes and imagining someone else hearing this across the world and saying, I'm putting them in a different place at this moment. It's so amazing. It is so fun and reaffirming, that storytelling is what I need to be doing, and just but doing it in a way that with empathy and acceptance.
Yeah. You mentioned that thing before where you said, like it's hard to sort of make sure your cup is full, to,
Mhm.
make sure you're taking care of yourself when you're helping others. And it reminds me of that phrase people use, like put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on someone else. But like, there's something about writing that I think offers something more powerful, where you have an opportunity to put the oxygen mask on yourself so you can put it on someone else, so they can then carry that message and put it on someone else, and they can put it on someone else. And you're not just putting the oxygen mask on one person, but you're putting it on a plane full of people when you're writing and you're doing the podcasting. And, I know for people who want to help others, you almost feel like there's never enough, but there's something so powerful about writing's ability to reach so many people through, just the simple effort that goes into it can impact so many lives. Think about like all that feedback you got. Well, how many hundreds of other people heard that line about the elf, or read that story like I read, who never said anything or never gave any feedback? Like,
Right.
there's probably so many people touched by this approach. Now, I'm not encouraging you to not sleep. I am but all of that said, like, you may be underestimating your impact.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's I think that you stated that very beautifully. I think you're exactly right. I think for me, speaking just for me, writing does really provide some measure of therapy and healing to me because I'm always talking about something from me, one of the things people like about the show is at the end of it, at the very end during the credits, I say Santa Maybe Your Colonel was conceived in, whatever, a Bucky's bathroom in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or, you
Grace
know,
Stadium in Savannah.
exactly. And those always relate to moments in my life or things that are real to when an idea occurred or whatever. But they're things that document my journey. They're things that I worked through a lot of my own internal thoughts and issues when I'm writing. So from that standpoint, it is very healing to me. But I think you're right. I think the power of storytelling in just about every medium, if you hit the right chord or strike the right chord, the multiplicity of it can be really astounding. And I have found that in the show. And I don't have a gigantic audience by any stretch of the imagination, but the audience that I do have, I can tell you, is absolutely amazing, super supportive, super. Every time I release something, they come to me and they tell me what it means to them.
Mm.
And that is so much more important to me in this project because this really is me sort of laying out a lot of my own thoughts about even though it's through a lens of sort of a true crime lens, there's a lot of, sort of veiled skepticism of the way media handles these cases. There are things that from my own personal, you know, feeling, you know, my own personal opinions that are in the show that, I think people recognize, and they're stated in a way that I think that it opens the door for conversation and doesn't shut down or diminish or judge people for the positions they're in.
Mm.
And I think that's really important. I think we're so quick to judge and we're so quick to dismiss and we're so quick to villainize that we've lost the ability to listen and communicate with each other. And that's the only way we're going to fix all the problems that we have. And we've got plenty of problems to fix. But, when we're sniping at each other or, casting these stones, it's just not beneficial. And so for me, like I do kind of come at this from a place of curiosity, acceptance, looking to work through things that matter to me because I do know that I deal with a lot of the same questions and things and vices and problems that thousands of other people do. It's going to connect with somebody, and if I can give people a laugh, and that's what I need a lot of time. I just need something to be funny. So there's so many times I used to say like I can't laugh at my own stuff, but there's so many times I sit here and listen
Oh,
when I'm listening back through, and I'm just
you know,
dying laughing. And I was like, that's funny.
I listen to myself every day and I laugh. Sometimes because it's funny, sometimes because I I wanted to just give you definitely a chance for some closing thoughts, but there's one important thing that all the listeners are going to want to know, including me. How do we stay on the nice list?
Well, I think all the things that we've talked about, I think it's acceptance. I think, not judging other people, obviously not doing any crime. I think it's really, by and large, it is accepting and caring for your family, friends, neighbors, strangers. I think there needs to be more of that. I think that and I'm not the authority, Santa Claus is. So this is me speaking for Richie Buck, basically.
So love everyone 100 times more.
Yes. Yeah. Love people years worth in a day to make up for everything. And there's also, give yourself grace because I think that we're so, and I deal with this a lot because I'm constantly thinking like I'm not doing enough and I could do more, and I have to give myself grace, and I think it's important for other people to give the people that they interact with grace, because life is hard. It's not.
Very.
There's nothing about it anymore that's really easy. It's hard. It's convoluted. We just went through a pandemic. The economy is, inflation's up. There's and no matter which side you're listening to, they're going to tell you that it's worse than it is. You know, give yourself some grace, love yourself, accept yourself, and provide a little bit of that grace and love to other people, because people need it right now. And there are a lot of people out there hurting, and there are a lot of people that could benefit from your podcast. I think and hope they could benefit from my podcast and from a lot of these other podcasts that are generally coming from places of pure intention.
Yeah,
And
I love that.
yeah,
Love that. Being dutiful, the idea of being dutiful to others and dutiful to yourself at the same time.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jason. I really do appreciate you coming on. This has been a really cool conversation. I'm just impressed by all of what you do and the space in which you do it and the love in which you do it with. Like, it's not every day that you come across someone and you just instantly, you guys joke in true crime that you can't do behavioral analysis very well, but yeah, I started talking to you just a few times on Twitter, and I instantly knew that this is a genuine, loving guy. And I just hope you have the opportunity to spread that love and spread that joy further and further.
Well, Jason, I really appreciate that. That's awesome, and I feel the same way about you. And I do hope that whatever it is that I'm able to do is helping somebody and giving them a laugh. And yeah, and I've had such a good time with you. I know I've rambled some, but I'm a Southern guy. That's what we
Right.
do. We sit on a rocking chair and we just talk and drink beer and
Well, I'm
it,
fine with it because, unlike you, I do like to hear my voice. No, I'm kidding. I hate it too.
no. Well, it's a joy. It's been such a joy to talk to you, and I hope we can do it again sometime. I know we were talking about something maybe for Christmas time. That would be great.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have to have you on Christmas. Maybe a Christmas preview to prepare everyone for the season. And I'd also love to come on to play whatever wacky.
Oh, I'm gonna get you on. I got to figure out what it is. I haven't outlined the whole season 3 yet, but we're gonna have a robust number of, because we have to have the jury. We have to have,
Ooh.
we got judges, we got
Uh-huh.
the defense team, we got the prosecution team, and then all the other stuff too, because we're not going to just. Initially, I was like, it's just going to be the trial, but now I'm like, well, now I've got
I
this.
deny all of Bob's motions. I would love to do
Oh, that's funny. That's hilarious. Oh my gosh, that'd be amazing.
that. All right.
Well,
Oh,
thank you so much, Jason. It's been a blast, and we'll talk soon.
yeah. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you next week.